Welcome to my studio, which is in my backyard. So I am excited to give you guys a little tour and talk to you about how I make my paintings. So I just wanted to kind of start with like, why am I explaining process? Because I think, yeah, not everybody wants to dig into that stuff. So I appreciate you being here to listen. So a common question that I get, and I think probably a lot of abstract artists hear this, is how long does it take you to make that painting? And I've decided after hearing that question and really trying to understand like what's the answer to that as opposed to 6 weeks, 1 year. I think that really that question means how did you make that painting? Because when you talk about time, you're talking about process and how long did each step take. And I think that for abstract artists, this can be a really good way of helping people to understand something that maybe isn't so easy to understand. Like when you look at a landscape or a portrait, you can see what the image is. And so I think it can be a good question. How long did this take, or how did you make that? It's not everything, but it's definitely a big part of it. So my paintings are very process driven. And each thing that I do on the currently wood panel is broken down into kind of sets of rules that I've created as I've gone along in my career. And hey, Steve, how you doing? Sorry, I got my first viewer, and now I want to make sure I'm full screen for myself. There we go. Hi. So one of the things that I think about when I'm working is, how are the materials going to do what I want them to do? And so that's a big part of my process. Yeah, so I'm just going to dive into it and start to show you what I do. So first, as you can see, painting. And I have been working on wood panels. And one of the things that I really like about the wood is the wood grain. And I've been incorporating that into my work. And so the first step really is picking out a wood panel. And so, for example, here's one that I like. It's got a lot of nice, interesting grain lines, and it's a very light color. And so one of the reasons that I like the light color, so I'm going to compare a darker one here, is that I am basically going to be staining it with paint. And so when you stain something, you're still letting that wood grain show through. And if the color of the wood is really dark, it's going to affect the color of the painting. And so here is one that's been stained, and this was also a very light wood color. And if it had been darker, I would not have been able to get this really vibrant aqua color, and this blue would have become more muddy. So that's a really important starting point for me. A new piece that I've been adding into my paintings is leaving parts of the wood raw rather than staining the whole panel. And one of the things that I learned was, the way that the wood absorbs the paint, it really wants to kind of creep over. And so if I taped this off and tried to just stain that area, it would try to creep underneath. So my next step after I picked the panel is to actually tape it off, and the area that I want to leave raw, I coat that. And so what I'm using is a medium, it's an acrylic medium. This is the brand I use a lot. I'm not trying to advertise for them, but it's what works for me. So this medium is made specifically to coat wood panels, to seal them and make sure that the paint isn't absorbing, and also it helps to keep the wood from getting moisture into it later. And so I'll even coat the back of it when I'm done. So that way, over time, the panel won't warp or crack from moisture. So once I have sealed off the section that I want to leave raw, I'm going to pull up that tape. And you can sort of see a little bit of a line there. See how it's shiny there? And so this area is going to more easily not end up with color on it. And so then the next step is going to be, because where that tape was, it likes to pull up little bits of wood grain. So the next step is going to be take some sandpaper and just smooth it out and make sure that there's no little bits sticking up, because that's, I don't like it. Maybe someone else wouldn't mind, but I want it to be really smooth. And so after that, I am going to actually put more tape down, and I'll just put this on really fast and then get to the fun part of starting to put some tape, some paint on there. And so I will now tape off the area that I had just sealed so that I can keep the paint from getting in there. And so now I'm ready to actually start putting some color on this. And another step that's really important with the tape is that you're really getting it to adhere to the board. So I will sometimes just use my fingernail, but I'll also use a palette knife and just really press it down. And again, that's sort of sealing it and making sure all those little tiny, tiny grooves don't become little spots for paint to run underneath. So now for the fun part. So I'm going to take this one, and the first step in the staining is I get a fairly good sized brush. Even on a small panel, I like to use a good sized brush because then I can really sort of press it and rub it in. And so I take a color. This one is a phthalo blue, and the nice thing about this paint is it's semi-transparent. And so if you use a paint that has a lot of white in it, it's going to just hide that wood grain and cover it back up. So you have to think about the transparency of the paint on this. You could use, wood stains, like regular wood stains, but there's not a lot of them out there that have really vibrant colors. And so I will just, if I'm not mixing a color, and I do sometimes, like mix colors, but I'm going to simplify here. But I'll just show you, this is my palette piece of glass, and I mix colors a lot. And I'm going to just go straight from the tube on this one just to keep things moving along. So I will put some on my brush, and as you saw, I took it out of some water and it's pretty wet. And I'm even going to dip it back in and get it a little wet. And so, I don't know, think about maybe like a watercolor, and see I'm now brushing it on, and it's kind of running, and that's fine. And I'm going to get a little more water. And so what's happening is the water is allowing the paint pigment to absorb into the wood. And then as it dries, that wood grain really starts to pop out. So you can see it, the wood grain is still present. And so this process, depending on the color, depending on how much vibrancy I want in it, I might just do 1 or 2 coats, but I've had paintings where I did 10 or 15, because once it dries, it changes a little as it soaks into the wood. And then I make decisions on, do I need more color? Do I want a little bit of a different color? Because sometimes it's nice to sort of modulate. So I'm thinking of this as a background, or like the space that I'm going to be putting my lines into. And so you can see with this one, I used more than one color, and some of them, I think the lines show a lot more with the darker color than with the lighter color. So, it really, every color is going to have its own reaction to the wood. And honestly, every piece of wood is going to react differently. And so this starting point can take a while, even though it could be just a simple single color, to get that grain to really show. So after I've done this, and I'd say this could take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks, and I'm usually working on more than one at a time, and it's fully dry, needs at least an overnight before the next step. And the next step is to coat the whole painting in that GAC 100. And so what that's doing is it is sealing all that color onto the surface and making sure that nothing is going to pull up or get washed off as I work on the next set of colors and lines. With this staining process, it's removing a lot of the actual acrylic medium and leaving behind the pigment. And so it's sort of like putting color onto something without anything to glue it on there. So sealing it is a very important next step. So we've got this one, it's sealed. And now we get to the even more fun part, which is putting down the lines. So if you know me and my work, you know that I pretty much do everything with masking tape. And so masking tape has become my language, my painting language. It's a way for me to control what I'm doing. It's a way for me to sort of sketch out ideas and then decide if that's the one that's working. And so I might put down some tape and make a curve, and then I can kind of look at that and think, is that really the shape that I want? And if it's not, I can pull it back up and, keep trying until I get what I want. And so for me, I have an idea of what I want when I get started, but I don't know at the very beginning that, that the painting is going to look like this at the end. It's more, I know I want this color to start, and then I know I want this big line, and I make that, and then everything else kind of is a reaction to those colors and those first lines. And so it's it's kind of a feeling it out as I go process, and it works for me. So once I have put down the first line, I make another line. Out of the tape, and then I paint the space that's in between those. Now, as you can see, these are pretty thin lines, and I can tell you that the reason I like this tape is because you can really curve it without it buckling. And every time you curve tape, if it kind of creases, that's where paint's going to run underneath. And so it's important that it's really sticking to the panel, which is one of the reasons I like working on wood so much. It's a great surface for this tape. So after I've done that, I usually will take a thicker tape, and here, I can even just show you on this next one. I'll take a thicker tape and I'll line that edge. And so, just making one line is a multi-step process. And there's something about going slow that's interesting, because these lines have a lot of motion and movement, and yet they're made in a very slow and methodical way. And I just find it interesting to think about, how the passage of time really, something that looks like it was made quickly can take hours. So once I've lined the other side so that I don't accidentally paint over my edge, because I've done that many times and it drives me nuts, Then I will, well, first I will make sure it's on there really good. So I seal it, I press it down, palette, knife, fingernail, whatever is feeling right in the moment. And then I will take, this is my little mixed bottle, but I use something called matte medium. And so, I don't know if you can see that. Matte medium is something that you can mix into your paints to make them less shiny, matte, glossy. And so the matte medium is just a clear acrylic with this, I guess I could have looked up what's in it. It's like little particles that diffuse light, and those little particles make it easier when it's time for me to pull up that tape, for one, for the tape to come off properly, but two, putting this down on here helps to seal, and I'll get in a little closer. So you can see, like, even along here with this curve, the paint really wants to get underneath there, and it wants to find its own path. So this helps to seal the tape to the panel, and then I don't have paint running all over the place. So now I'm gonna put a little, so this one I have taped off. I've put 2 coats of matte medium, and I'm just gonna do a little painting on it so I can show you. So this is one that I started, and I feel like it needs a couple more lines. And so I'll just take a brush, and again, a lot of times I'm mixing colors, but for this, I'm going to go straight from the tube because that's fine too. And so when I'm deciding what colors to do, little paintings like this, it's often just sort of playing around with what do I think is going to look interesting or stand out, or create an interesting effect. But especially in my bigger ones, I'm usually working off of photos that I have taken out in nature that I use for inspiration. So they might be the colors of a plant that I really like, or I might have a whole series of pictures of the sky, and I will try to use all the different colors in it and think about ratios. And yeah, it's just, it's sort of this way I can tell a story of a moment in time, and just kind of break it apart into these lines and do something fun with it. So now we've got some color on there, and the really fun part is once I've done usually 2 or 3 coats, sometimes more, just depends on the paint and how opaque it is. Then I get to pull the tape off, and I've got one going over here. I think you guys can see that here. You know what? Let me just push that up a little. There we go. So I've got this one that I painted earlier, and so I just get in there and pull the tape down. Sometimes it wants to come off in more than one piece. But the cool thing is that I get a line that I can completely control where it goes, and I can mask off different areas to make, here, I'll even pull this off. I can mask off areas to make it look like a line is going under. So here you can see it kind of stops there, and it looks like it's going under, but this line was painted earlier, and then so it goes over here and under here. And every line that I make, I'm just stepping back and looking at the whole and saying, what else needs to be there. And so that part, depending on the size of it and the goal, that can take of weeks, couple of months. And in between making lines, if I'm going to have a line that crosses over another one, I usually will paint like a clear acrylic medium over it, just to protect the lines underneath so they don't start pulling up. And yeah, so that's the process. And so I have a little video that I made, a time lapse. Well, I took the video and then I actually did this painting on a panel for a local company called Ampersand, and they were launching a new line of large panels and asked me to contribute something to a series that they were putting out. So they took all the video that I had made of making a painting and condensed it down into 1 minute, which felt, my head was spinning when I saw it, because it took me about 8 weeks to make that. But I would love to pull that up and show it to you. Here we go. So I hope everybody can see that. So as you can see here, I'm masking off the sections that I wanted to leave raw, the raw wood. And then I spent probably a week getting the base color the way I wanted it to be. So this panel is 4 feet by 4 feet. So it's a good size. I like working on something this size just because, you know, you can sort of get your body involved. So once I had that stain the way I wanted, I take it off the wall to coat it, just so I can get it really flat. It's good to have that acrylic medium when you seal it to not have a lot of ridges and drips, because once you start taping things, anywhere that there is something that isn't perfectly flat, you're going to have problems with paint running under the tape. And so, especially with a painting this big, like the first main lines can take days, you know, because it's sort of like that big commitment. And so I spend a lot of time just like putting something down and then taking it back off, and then putting it down and taking it back off. And so this is the video that Ampersand made that they used in their marketing. So there's a little music on that one. But yeah, the painting was inspired by a trip that I took last summer to Colorado and went camping in the mountains with some friends and my family. And, you know, I was just thinking a lot about just all the really vibrant blues and greens out there, the sky and the rivers that flowed around the mountain. And so those little bits of tape were shimmer lines that I was putting on there. And yeah, it was nice to make the painting and just think about that time when I was stuck at home. And so that's the finished painting. So that is my painting process in 30 minutes. It's pretty fast, but I hope that helped you understand a little bit more about what I make and how I make it. And, you know, I feel really lucky to be able to create art. And as a painter, especially, it's, you know, it costs money to make these things. And I just appreciate that people want to look at it. And if you're interested in my work and you want to see more, please reach out to me. And yeah, so thanks for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.